Welcome back, Drive Guys, Drapes and Jay here on Sactown Sports 1140. Our guy Kevin Gleason, Whitey, he'll be back tomorrow. Holding it down is me and Jay. My pleasure right now to welcome in Brett Siegel of Clutch Points. And first of all, Brett, thanks for coming on the show. What's that jersey behind you there, big fella? Where's that from? High school, intramural? What's that number 20 from behind you?
That is a Louisville Cardinals jersey, number 20, the year I graduated from Louisville. I was a student manager there for Chris Mack and his staff. So we were number one in the country then, and ultimately the tournament got canceled that year. Yeah. And we weren't able to pursue our national championship aspirations, but I always have that hanging right next to me as a friendly reminder that we were going to the Final Four that year.
You were, man. Hey, man, I used to work in Louisville back in the day, WHAS television when Rick Pitino was the coach. I was a sports director out there, and so glad you are on the show. Always got love for Louisville. No, is that where you're from?
No, it's not. I'm from New Jersey.
Oh, sorry to hear that. I'm from Philly, and, we look down on people from Jersey. I'm joking with you, Brett. Hey, man. Yeah. I might ask you a Sixers question here coming up in just a minute. But first, let's start with my Sacramento Kings. I maintain this is an important week for Sacramento, Brett. When you look at having the number 13 overall pick, do they keep it? Do they swing a trade? What's your vibe for this week for Sacramento and what moves they could make this week?
Well, it's not just a big week for the Sacramento Kings. It's a huge offseason. And the reason for that is because of all the money that they have out there already. They gave Sabonis that big extension. And obviously you wanted to get Fox and lock him up on a big extension. But that doesn't seem like it's going to be the case anymore, as De'Aaron Fox wants to see what this team is going to look like. The Athletic had a recent story come out today or yesterday on that, talking about the fallout of them being involved in the Alex Caruso talks, and ultimately the Bulls sending him to the Oklahoma City Thunder for Josh Giddey and no draft picks. Meanwhile, the Kings are actively looking to trade their 13th pick in this year's draft, and they were involved in talks that would have sent that pick to the Chicago Bulls. So now, after falling out on Caruso, what kind of options are available? Because the Kings don't have all that much room and that much ability to move contracts. You got guys like Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter, but they don't have much of a market out there of teams really being interested in those guys. If they are going to trade for them, it's going to be more of trading for those contracts. And you look at where they're at. Harrison Barnes, he's still got 2 more years left on his current deal. He's on the books for $18 million this upcoming season. And then Kevin Huerter, 2 more years on his deal, just slightly underneath Barnes. I believe it's around $17 million that he's on the books there. So what moves can the Kings make? I think it's going to be a decision that comes right up to draft night. And I think that it's not only because of who becomes available, but which players are going to be on the board. This year's draft in particular is so volatile in the definition of you don't know who's going to be there past the 10th pick. You don't know who's going to be there past 11 and 12. It just really depends on what happens at the very top, starting with the Hawks at number 1.
Joined by Brett Siegel of Clutch Points, NBA insider and reporter. Brett, I'm glad you brought up here HB and Kevin Huerter, because around here in Sacramento, they are the names that are always tossed out as trade bait. Just from your standpoint, your opinion, you're in the circles of the NBA. What have you heard their value being? Because we have a joke here on this team that they're like the Toyota Corolla. They're a Toyota, but they're the base Toyota Corolla. We know they're going to run for forever, but they don't have any pizzazz. What are you hearing from inside the circles, the NBA circles?
Well, the biggest thing with the Kings is that if you're going to move on from one of them, and presumably you're going to do so to upgrade your roster, if you're the Kings, you're probably going to have to attach that 13th overall pick to it. You may even have to attach some future compensation to it if you are going to go out and get one of these big names on the market. But again, it just really depends on who's going to be available. We've heard the talk of Zach LaVine possibly being a target for the Sacramento Kings. That hasn't gone away. I've been told that that's still a viable scenario if the Kings want to pursue it. Obviously, the Bulls are willing to move on from LaVine, but now that Caruso can no longer be included in the deal, I'm not sure that would be as much of an appealing situation for Sacramento at this juncture. Obviously, though, you can still package Barnes and Huerter together. You can get to a $30 million threshold right there, attach the 13th pick to, and all of a sudden you have a very lucrative package for a guy that's making anywhere in that 28 to 32, $33 million range. As far as their value, it's hard to project simply because I don't see any one of those guys, Huerter or Barnes, being traded straight up for another player. I think this is a situation where it would be a package deal, package with a draft pick, maybe even that 13th overall pick like we discussed, and then go from there of seeing who's going to be available on the open market. I would expect the Kings to be in negotiations and be in talks on the phone, a draft pick on draft night. And I'm going to throw another name at you. I think that Jeremy Grant with the Portland Trailblazers is another name that the Kings should pursue. I think that he would be an excellent fit for Mike Brown's system. And I think that he's widely available, a lot more available than people tend to believe at this point.
What do you think it would take to get a guy like that?
I think it's going to take multiple draft picks. I don't think that Portland is going to make a trade just for the sake of making a trade. And obviously they do have the 7th and 14th pick in this year's draft. So what would really the 13th pick do for them unless they're planning on moving up even further in this draft to maybe go after a guy like Donovan Clingan at the top of the draft board? And the Hawks have interest in Clingan. There's been talk of the Spurs possibly interested in him at 4, and even the Grizzlies are a team that's looking to trade up along with the Blazers. So I think that if Portland has ideas of moving up, they would be interested in that 13th overall pick, but it would most likely take more from the Kings. It would most likely take a future first-round pick, maybe even some second-round picks. So is Jeremy Grant worth that price? That's something that the Kings would have to discuss internally.
Brett, it's interesting you throw out Jeremy Grant and Zach LaVine. And to me, when you throw out names like that, no disrespect to, because we love Zach LaVine here on the show on the Drive, guys. We've been politicking for Zach for a long time. But these guys aren't top flight. You know, they're not Mikal Bridges. They aren't can't miss guys. They have something going on. Zach LaVine, to a lot of people, has some type of injury, you know, being injury prone, missing 10, 15, 20 games a season. Of course, he coming off a major injury. Are there any opportunity for the Kings, if we look at their 3 or 4 draft picks, down to 4 future draft picks or this 13, to where maybe they might be able to bump up and maybe go grab somebody like a Mikal Bridges or, a Brandon Ingram, someone who may be in a higher tier than a Zach LaVine or Jeremy Grant?
I certainly think that Brandon Ingram would be a viable candidate there. I think that he's available for the right price, and there really hasn't been a market for Brandon Ingram to this point. There haven't been teams lining up and knocking on the Pelicans' door to try to get Brandon Ingram and offering up multiple first-round picks, because they know that Ingram wants to test free agency next year. He's in the final year of his contract. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent in 2025, and early indications right now point in the direction of him not wanting to sign an extension during the 24-25 season. So you'd essentially be paying all of this assets, giving up all these assets for a guy in the final year of his contract. Yeah, Brandon Ingram's a great scorer, but do you really want to run the risk of giving up all of that only for him to leave in free agency next year? And I think that's where the concern lies with Brandon Ingram right now. And you look at other guys around the league, Mikal Bridges, I've heard, is just completely off limits. I don't see any scenario in which the Nets give him up this offseason unless they're completely blown away with Rudy Gobert ×2 size package there. So I just don't see that being a scenario that any team would really pursue. And then you look at Ingram, that's really the name that people are focused on of what are the Pelicans going to do here? There's talk that they could move up in the draft. There's talk that they could potentially move out of their pick in the 20s and gather second-round assets. What are they really planning there? Because you have Zion Williamson, you still have CJ McCollum, and obviously Trey Murphy's a guy that they believe can be an all-star quality talent, which is why they have interest in moving on from Brandon Ingram this offseason and cutting costs while they can. So that's really where I'm looking at heading into the draft is Brandon Ingram going to be on the move over the next few days? And talking with people in league circles, I think that there is a possibility that he could be moved. And I'm looking at a team either like the Atlanta Hawks or a team like the Utah Jazz who are in the market for a big name star this offseason.
Brett Siegel of Clutch Points joining us here on the Drive, guys. Brett, you bring up, talk about Ingram. And I'm looking at the Kings, their salary structure, and this is something you touched on a bit ago. De'Aaron Fox is going to get an extension at some point, probably not this offseason, but next offseason. That's going to pay him more than $40-50 million a year. So bonus is at $217 million. You're going to have to re-sign Keegan Murray. Do you think the Kings, because of those future contracts, are sort of hamstrung on what they can do from a financial aspect, taking in a guy like a Jeremy Grant who's going to be paid $33, $34, $35 million in the coming years? Should we be looking more at the $20 million kind of player?
Yes and no. I think that there's advantages and disadvantages to both scenarios. And obviously, targeting a guy like Jeremy Grant would be huge for the Sacramento Kings. He'd be that secondary scorer that you need next to De'Aaron Fox. You can put him on the wing. He can defend virtually any position out there. And he would fit Mike Brown's system really well. He'd pretty much take Harrison Barnes' spot while being more of a productive scorer than Kevin Huerter. And I think that's a 2-for-1 right there if you were to get a guy like Jeremy Grant. But I think that for the Kings, of looking at your financial situation, I don't necessarily know if they're looking 3, 4, 5 years from now and worrying about that. I think this is a situation where Monty McNair and the front office really want to prove that this past year was a fluke, that they didn't make the playoffs. This team is primed to make the playoffs, and they're going to be doing everything they can to make the playoffs. So I think that we're going to see moves made by the Kings this offseason, whether it's 1 or 2 trades made to bring in established talents that can complement guys like Domantas Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox. They want to win. And they have a sense of urgency in Sacramento. I'm sure you guys can feel that being around the organization. And that's going to be the point of emphasis for them leading up to this draft, which is why that 13th pick is in play. Obviously, there's just so many unknowns this offseason because there's teams wanting to cut costs, there's teams wanting to stay under the second apron, and that could lead to certain stars being on the move. One of which that I'll throw out there right now is Paul George. I'm not saying that the Kings are going to want to pursue Paul George.
Speaking into existence, Brett, go ahead.
If the Kings want Paul George, they can go get him. And Paul George's situation right now is not looking very good for the Clippers. It looks like that if he does opt in, they're going to be seeking trade opportunities there to get him off the books because they don't want to give him Kawhi Leonard like money. And if the Kings want to, and they see Paul George being a fit, they can go out and get him.
Man, Brad, you're speaking some good news out there from Kings fans. What was your take of course, not being here on the West Coast and being on the East Coast? What was your take of the Malik Monk contract signing and him returning to Sacramento?
It was surprising, but at the same time, it wasn't. And I say that because Malik Monk has always wanted to stay in Sacramento. He's ushered those words ever since they lost in the play-in tournament. He said in his post-game press conference that he wanted to stay in Sacramento. The city loves him. He loves the city. So seeing him take less money to stay with the Kings is not surprising. But what was surprising was the figure on that contract, because that's going to set the stage for some of these other guys in free agency. Maybe there's guys that now get more money than was projected because of the amount that Malik Monk got. And I think that it's just a domino effect this offseason in particular of guys getting certain kinds of contracts and getting certain guaranteed money on their deals because of those first few deals that trickle in. And we can look at Malik Monk, we can look at Pascal Siakam. Those are going to really be the baselines that other teams now compare their players to. So I think that it's a good deal for the Kings. I think that it's not a long-term deal that ties them down financially. I think that it's pretty generous for them. And I think that based on his production and being a 6th man of the year candidate, I think that this is exactly what they needed. You don't lose out on that bench scoring production behind Fox. You bring back a guy that wants to be there, and now you're going to make a run for the playoffs again.
Brett Siegel of Clutch Points joining us, NBA insider and reporter. Brett, who are some of the other names that might be on the move? I'm hearing everybody in Atlanta might be on the move or available other than DeAndre Hunter maybe, or not DeAndre Hunter, Johnson down there. I'm hearing things out of Milwaukee. Give me some names that you expect to be moved here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, Atlanta is certainly a team at the forefront of many other organizations' minds. And you look at Trae Young and DeJounte Murray right away. I've personally been told that they don't want to trade Trae Young. But again, anything can happen in this league. If they're offered the right package and they can't turn it down, that's going to be something that they explore. But DeJounte Murray is certainly more of a player that they would like to deal if they are to cut costs this offseason. Clint Capella is at the front of their list. They want to potentially move Clint Capella, and there's been all that talk of them potentially drafting Donovan Clingan or Alex Sarr at the top of the draft, so it would make sense if they moved on from Capella this offseason. Looking in the Western Conference, I think that it's going to be interesting because you have that Paul George situation that I laid out. You have the Houston Rockets who are looking to be aggressive, and I would never count out the Memphis Grizzlies for making a move either. Zach Kleiman and that front office are always very aggressive during the draft. They move up and down the draft board, and this is an organization that is going to be primed to make a playoff pursuit once again. They got hit really hard by the injury bug this past season. You had John Moran out, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, who they recently got, was out for more than half the year with his finger injury. And that you still have Jaren Jackson there, and you got some really good young talents. You got Santi Aldama, Zaire Williams. So I think that the Grizzlies can be a sleeper team in the West. I could easily see them rising up and claiming a top 4 seed again in the West. And I wouldn't count out them making a big move either, because you still have Luke Kennard on the books. You still have Brandon Clark. Those are 2 contracts that you could possibly move with some draft picks to bring in another solidified talent to really make a strong push in the Western Conference playoff picture.
Yeah, man. I think we agree. Memphis is scary, Brett.
Yeah.
They're definitely scary. One of the teams that's around here and that they have a few names that's on the move, could be on the move, look to sign. Golden State Warriors with Klay Thompson being up in the market. We've heard Chris Paul, of course. They just guaranteed Kevon Looney's contract today. They have a lot of movement. What's your take on where Klay goes? What do you think Klay goes?
It's a very unique situation because Klay Thompson during the year, much like Malik Monk with the Kings, said that he wanted to be with the Warriors. He wants to be a Warrior for life. Stephen Curry, Draymond Green, Steve Kerr, they've all been behind the scenes advocating for Klay to come back. But this is a different front office than what's been there with the Warriors in recent years. Mike Dunleavy inherited it from Bob Myers. And quite honestly, it was a little bit of a mess of what he inherited in terms of the financial situation. They brought in Chris Paul. You have that non-guaranteed contract they could potentially opt into and move if they were to bring back Klay Thompson. So I do think that as of right now, the direction that they're trending with no deal being on the table, no offer being there ahead of free agency, it does really seem like Klay Thompson is going to give a strong sense and thought to leaving the Warriors this offseason and look at other offers from teams in the Eastern and Western Conference as well. Could that potentially be a leverage play to get more and get what he wants from the Warriors? Potentially it could be. And I do know that the Warriors still want Klay Thompson back. They just don't want to pay that kind of price that they paid to Stephen Curry and Draymond Green to retain him. So could he potentially take less on a team-friendly deal? I don't think he's going to. I think that he's going to demand a higher price. And whether or not the Warriors are willing to pay that, that's going to be the ultimate driving force for the Warriors franchise. Because if they don't re-sign Klay Thompson and he leaves in free agency, now all of a sudden you have Kevon Looney's contract, you have Chris Paul's contract, maybe even Andrew Wiggins. Those are guys that you could potentially look to trade to bring in another big name. And one guy that I've been told to watch, and I reported on that over the weekend, is Paul George. They could potentially pursue George if Thompson is to leave. I would say that's more of a pipe dream at this point than anything else. But again, it all depends on which dominoes fall and in which direction they do fall.
Brett Siegel of Clutch Points joining us. Brett, I was going to ask you about, potential packages that the Warriors could offer. Do they have better assets than the Kings right now? Could they offer up a Kuminga? Would they be willing to include a guy like that in a big deal?
I think that they do have better assets than the Kings in terms of pursuing a star at this time. Obviously not from a draft pick perspective, I wouldn't say. I would think that the Kings picks are probably a little more lucrative than what the Warriors can offer. But from a player standpoint, you got Moses Moody. You have a guy like Brandon Podziemski. If you wanted to move on from him, he played really well in his rookie season, an all-rookie campaign there. You still got guys like Wiggins, Chris Paul, whose contract is really attractive, not only to move again for another team, but there's interest from Los Angeles and Paul, even before he went to the Warriors, of a reunion there. So I think that there's multiple scenarios that they could look at if they were to pursue Paul George. But I think that there's even more scenarios for the Warriors across the league of leveraging guys like Chris Paul, Andrew Wiggins, Moses Moody in trade talks to potentially bring in another star or another guy making $20 to $25 million in that range. Even if you are to bring back Klay Thompson, there's a scenario where you could bring back Thompson and potentially move on from Paul, Kevon Looney, and some of those other guys to bring in another established player and pursue another championship late in these guys' careers. So I think that the Warriors front office have a lot of decisions to make between now and the draft. I think that they have a lot of decisions to make between the draft and free agency.
Brett, before we get you on out of here, someone that I've been completely bullish on here and someone I would like to, maybe see enter our organization here in the Sacramento Kings, and he has a lot of baggage, but his name has a little value on the court. That's Miles Bridges. Are you hearing anything, any movement, any type of situation where Miles Bridges could be had?
I do. I think that there's a viable market out there for Miles Bridges. I think that there's a handful of teams interested in his services, but he's going to come at a price. He came off another good year, and granted, he's had all that off the court drama with the domestic violence case. That's caused some teams to not even consider him as a free agent, just from an organizational belief. There's some teams that don't want to deal with that drama, but there's a team like the Detroit Pistons who have shown interest in Miles Bridges in the past. they could be willing to offer him $20-25 million a year. And I think that's kind of the price range that we're looking at for Bridges. So if the Kings wanted to get him, that would most likely be a sign and trade scenario where they would have to give up Kevin Huerter, probably the 13th pick in the draft, maybe even a guy like Davion Mitchell to make that happen. And now you're hard capped because you got Miles Bridges in a sign and trade. So I don't necessarily know if that's an avenue that Monty McNair and the Kings want to go, but it's certainly there and certainly a possibility if Bridges is the guy at the top of their wish list.
Brett Siegel delivering some jewels out here on a Monday. Brett, I'll leave it with this question with you. This week, you expect a lot of movement in the NBA?
Oh, yeah. It's going to be a very busy week. I think that we're going to see numerous trades made during the draft, both including established talents and teams moving up and down the draft board. And then once free agency begins, once those first few dominoes start falling, we could start seeing even more trades and guys like Paul George, if he's going to be on the move, guys like Brandon Ingram and DeJounte Murray, if they're not traded on draft night. I think this is going to be a very eventful offseason. I think it's going to be a lot more eventful than people are making out to be. And I'll say this about the draft too. I think that there's talent up and down this draft board. There may not be a Victor Wembanyama or an Anthony Edwards at the top of the draft board, but there's guys that I could see having double-digit year careers in the NBA and guys that can come in and really help a lot of playoff teams right now. So I think that it's going to be a lot deeper draft than many are making it look like. And we kind of said the same thing a few years ago in 2020, and that turned out to be a pretty good draft then. So I do think that we're going to see movement, and I think that we're going to see plenty of new upcoming talents come into the league.
Brett, before I let you go, one last one.
We lied.
I know I could keep you here all afternoon because we're ending on the draft here. The draft obviously starts Wednesday and Thursday. With that 13th pick, how much value does that actually have, you think, in this draft?
It's going to depend on who falls outside the top 10. Guys like Rob Dillingham, Nikola Topic. I think that Ron Holland is another guy that could potentially fall. And I think that he would be a sneaky get for the Kings if he's on the board at 13. Devin Carter is another name that could potentially fall out of the top 10 and be available in that teens area of the lottery. So I think that it's going to be a very serviceable draft pick to trade. I think that there's going to be teams interested in moving up. Even a guy like Zach Edey, I think teams could potentially target at the end of the lottery if they were to trade up for the Kings pick there. So I think that the Kings are going to have options. I think that there's going to be avenues that present itself to Monty McNair in this organization. And right now, if I had to take a guess, I would lean towards the Kings making a move on draft night where they trade out of the 13th pick and bring in an established player that can help them in their playoff pursuit right now.
Great stuff from great Brett Siegel. Follow him on Twitter, X, Brett Siegel NBA. Brett, appreciate you, man. Good luck and everything, and thanks for jumping on with us.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me. Have a great week.
All right, now we'll talk to Brett Siegel again, of course. Some good stuff right there, some jewels. I know. How you feeling, Jay? You good?
Yeah. Drapes, I'm always enthused when I hear the Kings have a positive direction that they can approach. And so Brett dropping some of those jewels, as you said, it reinvigorates me.